Hi everybody, it's Clayton Smith here. Welcome to the show. Today I've got Devin Gray here, Realtor with EXP here in Edmonton. And we're just going to have a little chat on just some of the things that are going on in the Edmonton real estate market. And we'll get the conversation started and just kind of see where it goes from there. There's never really any script when I do these things. We just kind of have a chat and then let the editors work their magic, I guess. So
sounds good.
So let's start off with you. You've been how long have you been in the real estate game here now?
The real estate game itself, as an investor, Tracy, my wife, and I bought our first property back in 2007, and as a realtor, I got my license in 2019.
All right. So you've been in the game for a couple of years now. Well, more than a couple of years. We're 2004 now. 2024.
Yeah, coming up on 5 years as a real estate agent, and I definitely will say that you look at real estate from a different lens when you become a real estate agent. Obviously as a real estate investor, you're certainly watching the market and learning lots, but just being able to interact with so many people, it gives you an opportunity to just get a very different perspective about how people look at real estate, because you're not only talking to investors, but you're also seeing real estate in the eyes of a homeowner, and in a lot of cases that can be very different.
Right. Now, what are some of the things some of those differences you were talking about? So what's some of the things that you've seen or have you noticed any perspective change now from going from the investor? Now you've gotten your real estate license,
Yeah.
now you're the realtor. So what's it like being on that side of the table? A lot of investors look at making that switch and getting their license and things like that.
Yeah, just in terms of just the difference, obviously, between an investor and a homeowner, it's easy. An investor looks at numbers. Sometimes they will get caught up in the emotion of it, and they have to get themselves brought down to the numbers. Whereas a homeowner, it's a lot more emotion-based, and it's interesting actually in dealing with some homeowners, because just with all the news out there and education and that, people definitely look at real estate differently. They're always asking, what could I sell this for in 5 years, or what do you think this would be worth in 5 years? What do you think if I did this to the house and stuff like that? And this is if they're looking to purchase it to live in, and so I will actually ask that question back to them. It's like, okay, I'll answer all that, but first, do you like the house enough that you want to buy it to live in? And they, oh yeah, right, yes, yeah, okay, that's an interesting conversation. But then other times it's just purely emotion based, right? Which is great, because you want to be passionate about something. You're going to spend every day in it, and so that's when it gets fun as well. When people find something that they truly become passionate about, and you're able to help them achieve it by purchasing it.
Okay. Now you work with a mix of owner-occupied, people buying for their own homes, and you work with investors a lot too.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably about 60% investors and 40% homeowners.
All right, good. What are some of the things that so for the investors that are watching this, what are some insights you've gained, both having been an investor yourself and also people that are maybe they're just wanting to start out, maybe they're kicking the tires right now and they want to become investors and they want to buy that first property. What are some things you can remember from your experience?
Well, going back to, I would say first off, and some people will, the fun part is looking at the houses. They need to make sure that they've got a power team in place, and that they really have a firm understanding financially of what they can and cannot do. And that's why I can tell when there are seasoned investors that I'm working with that have decided that they want to bring Edmonton on as a place that they'd like to invest. We're talking from a standpoint of, I'm building out my power team, which at Mogul we actually can really speed that up, because we have a power team, so we can introduce them to a lawyer and a property inspector, property managers, investor-focused mortgage broker, and they all understand investing. But that's how I can tell that a seasoned investor from a newer one. And then also the other thing as well, from a seasoned investor, they've got a good grasp of what they can and cannot do from a financial standpoint. Chances are they've already talked about things with a mortgage broker. That's usually one where they like, oh no, I've already been introduced to somebody from that standpoint. Whereas a newer investor, they just want to look at houses. And so from that standpoint as well, it's also really important to understand, the type of what type of owner you're going to be from a landlord standpoint, because you're going to attract that type of tenant. I like to do a thing, I call it my map tour, where I like to do it on Zoom because I can bring up an interactive map and show people the different areas of the city and what type of tenant they can expect. Because you can always, and this is an age-old saying, you can always change the property, but you can never change the location. And you can make a Taj Mahal in a sketchy area, and you're still going to attract that same tenant. And that you might get, there's always a range of tenants. There's going to be the best tenant you can get in a certain range and the worst tenant. Well, that best tenant in a poor neighborhood might be the worst tenant you'll get in a great neighborhood where the tenant is way up there. And I've seen that a lot I've seen really, really rundown properties in great neighborhoods, and talking to the owner where they never have a problem renting it out. And I've toured those homes, talked to the tenants while they're in there if they've decided not to leave while we're viewing it. And I say, why are you living here? And they will, it's close to this, it's convenient, it's close to this. They never say anything at all about the house. It's all everything that makes that area great. And so, and they look like they're good tenants. And then if that seller took that next step and actually renovated that property, they probably would get that top end tenant profile.
Okay. There was a question I had when it comes to every realtor that I've ever talked to talks about the importance of working with pre-qualified buyers.
Yeah.
And what's one of the questions, or what's one of the things that you would really like to have clients lined up? And I know that the financing is a huge part of it. What's a step that a buyer, whether they're an investor or whether they're just looking for a home, what's an important step before they even talk to a realtor, or maybe the first conversation you'd want to have with a client?
Yeah, well, when it comes to pre-approval, I always go back to, I think I was a realtor for 2 months, and I definitely learned this the hard way. Latched onto a father-son investor duo. They wanted to look at some properties. I must have showed them 12 properties, and thankfully not more. And they wanted to make an offer on one, so we did, and we wrote the offer up. And then when it came to how long of a condition, they said, well, we want 5 weeks. I was like, 5 weeks, just even in my early stage in training in that, I knew that standard and the most we'd ever see is 2 weeks. And I said, well, why do you need 5 weeks? Oh, well, we have to go get our financing lined up now. I'm like, oh, okay. So then I said, well, how about I introduce you to a mortgage broker? And the dad said, oh, no, I want to go and talk to every bank personally. So he actually did. He actually then went and walked into each of the five, and I was like, this is... So I, went to my mentors, advisors, coaches, and they said, well, you definitely learned the hard way of kind of one of the, big questions to ask. You don't want it to be the first thing because you want to, obviously show rapport and build relationship and stuff like that. But, even just a kind of more of a standard question you could say is, are you paying cash for the property or are you financing? Well, 95% of people are financing. Oh, great. And so can I ask who your bank or your mortgage broker is? Oh, I don't have that done yet. Oh, okay. Well, let me tell you about the importance of that. And really then it is getting into just trying to make sure that, they're not actually wasting their time. And
it just saves everybody time.
Yeah, and especially getting disappointed that if somebody's going to go and look at $400,000 houses, but then they get pre-approved and find out they can't afford anything more than $350,000. Well, they're going to get disappointed by that. And from a standpoint of a realtor, yeah, you want to, if they find that I only want to buy a $400,000 house, then the message will come from the financial side. You need to save up for a larger down payment, and maybe we need to put this on hold for 6 months. So, and positioning it from a standpoint of providing value and helpfulness. You don't want to set somebody up to be disappointed. You want them to know that they're ready to go, and so those are the early conversations you have.
All right, and I might also find out, your buyer might find out that they just bought a new car, and that adds $1,000 to their monthly expenses, and then now they're going out house shopping. You don't want to be the guy to deliver the bad news.
I haven't personally had that happen, but I've heard from mortgage brokers that have said, and actually they've been in the process of getting them pre-approved, and then find out where did this $600 a month car loan come from? Oh, we bought a car yesterday. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? So it does honestly happen, and that's part of the situation of people. I think sometimes we get so into it that you forget. I try to remind myself back to even in my first year all the time about, going through the contracts and stuff like that, and trying to. They read so easy to me now, but obviously trying to remember to when a 6-page real estate contract was thrust in front of me, and you're going, oh my gosh, right? And I can see that as well, even with just some people where I've never asked, because I'm like, it can't be that way, but maybe it is, where some people are like, yeah, I think I'd like to make an offer, and they think I'm just supposed to verbally throw an offer at the seller and then we handshake the deal or something like that. I honestly don't know. I'm not sure, but once we get into the process of, there needs to be an exclusive representation agreement, and there's a consumer relations guide from Real Estate Council of Alberta, then this document, I will make sure as early as possible say, hey, just so you know, there's about 14 or 15 pages of documents that you're going to need to be aware of. Let's go through these now. Let's get some of these documents taken care of, because especially as we're in a stronger market where houses are selling quicker, you might need to make a spot decision, and all of a sudden at 8 o'clock at night, if you have purposely decided you're trying not to look at all those documents, and then all of a sudden now you want to make an offer, and I'm rushing you along to go through 15 pages, and you're going, I wasn't expecting all this. It's like, well, I've been trying to get you to look at this, and now you're in a situation where you might miss out on this property because you're being rushed when it doesn't need to be that way. So a buyer needs to understand when a realtor is telling them certain things that they need to do, they should do them.
Okay. And that's something I've heard from other realtors and mortgage brokers too, is the importance of just getting some of that stuff lined up before they even go shopping.
Yeah.
They're going to save themselves time, they'll save you time, and then when you have a competitive market, let's call it a buyer's market that we're getting into now.
Or a seller's market.
Or a seller's market that we're getting into now. People are, buyers have got to compete, and if you're not ready to buy because you don't have a pre-approval, you don't have all this paperwork lined up, well, your deal's going to get scooped by somebody else that is ready.
Yeah, and that incredibly important. Nothing really actually moves forward unless those things are put in place and signed and delivered to the other side of the transaction. But it's not the fun stuff. The fun stuff is going out and looking at properties, but you could look at properties all day long and nothing's happening. So, and that's, I think, in a lot of situations in life, a lot of times the stuff that makes something actually go is the stuff that's not very, very much fun. But that again is also why we're here, and we can simplify the explanation in terms of what these contracts are, even from a standpoint of just understanding that on the buying side, for example, that there are a lot of things in those contracts to protect the buyers. No different than there's also some situations or some clauses in the contracts that protect the sellers. Those are the responsibilities of the real estate agent to point those out, so that they can rest assured that nothing is going to move forward unless you fully understand this, and it is there for your protection.
Now, that's an important point. Speaking of protection, one of the things that you get into when you get into a hot market, and we saw this in the last boom, where people were starting to make unconditional offers. You talked about a longer condition. One of your early clients getting into a longer condition date, and I want to revisit that because I want to close off that story too.
Yeah, sure.
But before we do that,
they never did buy.
They never did buy. Okay, that's what I wanted to get to. So there's a lesson there. What are some of the risks that people can get into now that we're getting into a hot market, and people are going to get into there's a temptation to make an unconditional offer just for the sake of getting that property? What are some of the pitfalls that they can get into?
The pitfall of unconditional offer is that you need to make sure that you have your financing absolutely guaranteed, or you have cash.
enough of a buffer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that's the situation, because if you're making an unconditional offer and you don't know that 100% you're going to get financing from your lender, you run the risk of defaulting on that contract, and then there's potential legal ramifications that go on in the fact that you have to renege on the contract, and the seller has the right to then pursue make up the difference.
Damages.
Yeah, the damages and stuff like that. And then
And it could be more than just the deposit, potentially. Usually it's a deposit.
well, for sure it's the deposit. That's 100% lost, which is again why it's good to have a larger deposit in place. But if there is, say, a declining market,
Good to have a bigger deposit for the seller.
bigger deposit for the seller. That's right. Yeah. And so, and if it's a declining market, and let's say a house sold for $400,000, long close, say 60 days, and then maybe the value, unfortunately, the value of the property maybe dropped by $20,000.
So wait, hang on a second. Don't real estate prices always go up? Isn't that what we were told for years and years?
So as I was told at one real estate seminar, they go up and down upwardly. So if you look over a long period of time, 10 years, yes, real estate goes up.
Generally speaking.
Generally, but I can still tell you that if you look at Alberta, unfortunately, or more specifically Edmonton, I remember helping some people try to sell some homes in 2018, 2019, and their value, they bought in 2007, their value was still less than what it was in 2007. So no, real estate does not always go up. Long term, maybe, most likely, but it goes up and down upwardly.
You gotta give it time to be right.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Anyways, the other concern about unconditionals is inspection. Is that if there's anything wrong with that property, even if it's just, if you're, again, as we've talked a lot, I am not a fix-it guy. So every issue in a home is a big deal for me. But I also surround myself with lots of people that know how to fix those things, and I'm very happy to pay them to do that. But some people, especially new home buyers, when they run inspections, if they have an inspection condition, I will always tell them in advance, just so you know, when you get this 80-page report back, you're going to feel like the house is falling apart.
Right.
And they'll laugh, and then they get the report, and I go, do you feel like the house is falling apart? And they go, yes. I'm like, it's not. There's something wrong with every house. Even a house that's even 1 day old has numerous things wrong with it.
That's the inspector's job to basically.
That's right.
Point out.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like a honey-do list, So basically, you get this report. There's lots of things that work. There's lots of things that might need some maintenance, and then there's some certain things that will have failed. And so you might need to deal with those things, and either the seller does or the buyer will have to on possession day moving forward. But if you don't do that inspection condition, you leave yourself open to not knowing how bad the property is.
Right.
And that's in terms of some of the really nasty stuff, mold in the attic, significant foundational cracks, major electrical or plumbing problems, things that could cost tens of thousands of dollars. But that's where, if a contractor or a construction-based investor is shopping for distressed and derelict properties, they have the advantage of writing unconditionals because they don't care what the condition is, because they're just going to gut the whole thing and replace it anyways.
Or maybe just knock the whole thing down.
Or knock the whole thing down. That's right. Yeah. So there's even several contractors I know that they almost like finding properties that have foundational issues because they know how to fix them, and it scares away about 90% of the other investors because they just think like, oh, foundational problems, we're going to have to move on. So another aspect of moving into a seller's market that isn't as extreme as writing unconditional offers is that when we're in a buyer's or a balanced market, when a property is pending, most likely the realtor will tell that buyer, there's no point in moving on because most likely it's going to sell because there's just less buyers in the market, and so everyone's got more time to breathe, getting pre-approval lined up and all those types of things. In a seller's market, when people are recognizing that prices are going up, there'll be a lot of buyers that will be pushing their realtors, and a lot of realtors that will say, hey, let's get out and look at these properties before financing is completely lined up. So it's interesting then
now I will encourage my buyers to look at all pending properties, because there's a much higher likelihood that the deals are going to collapse because people don't have their financing in place. So during a balanced or buyer's market, not much point in seeing pending properties. There's lots of properties on the market. There's new properties coming on all the time, so it doesn't really necessarily make sense to go see those pending properties. But in a seller's market, when inventory is low, properties are selling fast, we go see every pending property, because there's a better chance that that deal is going to die, and you want to know that you've seen it, so that as soon as that property goes back on the market, you don't have to see it. You can just instantly make an offer and get it under contract.
Okay. What are you seeing right now? Like, would you say that things are kind of balanced right now? Are you seeing some glimmers of things taking off quickly? Where would you say we're at?
Yeah. So as you know, we've got the Mogul Mastermind, our monthly real estate meetup, and I do the market reports, and I've been telling everybody that Edmonton follows Calgary, and Calgary's been crazy for the past year because all of these people from other parts of the country are moving to Alberta, and they're going to go to the economic hub, which is Calgary first. We're also getting our fair share of immigrants. We're seeing 500,000 a year coming to Canada. Toronto, central, kind of southern Ontario is seeing 35 to 40% of them stay there. We're getting our fair share of everybody else, and of course they're going to start in Calgary. But then what happens, and so Calgary's been 14 months in this seller's market, but there is the real estate ripple effect where eventually that craziness starts to, move out, and it starts to come up the highway, and we've been waiting for that to happen in Edmonton. We're now 14 months behind when Calgary started going in January of last year, and it does seem like it's starting to go. It's much busier than a normal January, February, but everyone's talking about inventory being low. But it's certainly low based on the amount of buyers that are in the market right now. So we are seeing a lot of multiple bids. We're seeing properties going pending in 24 hours. We're seeing overlist sale prices. I just recently had a property sell for $41,000 over list, and it sold in 4 days unconditional. So the big question, though, is whether or not we continue to go on this frantic pace when we get into March, April, May, or does it curve out a little bit, because we traditionally see a lot more listings come on the market when we actually get into spring, March, April, May. That's right. So if the amount of buyers coming to the market continues to accelerate, and it continues to outpace the amount of listings that are coming on, then we will still continue to see this craziness. But if the buyers' amounts kind of levels off a little bit, and the listings start to increase, we're going to see a bit of a softening. I don't know if we necessarily would get back into more of a balanced, but anyways, it's a bit of a wait and see situation. I myself personally have 10 or 12 people that are kind of just waiting to press that button March, April, May about listing their property. They just, and it's a lot of it's because we're looking at comparables, and we're looking at what's going on in their community, and they're like, I'm not really seeing the price that I want, so I'm going to wait. Obviously, if we never get there, chances are they might be sitting for another year if the market then starts to soften in the back half of the year. But it's the risk. They're in a want to sell. They're not in a need to sell situation.
Are you starting to see people, we've had interest rates really take off over the last year or so.
Yeah.
Have you seen any kind of an impact that's made when it comes to the buyers, or when it comes to affordability or any of those issues there?
Well, I've definitely seen it affect the rest of the country, and so Alberta and the rest of the country are definitely on a seesaw. When Alberta does well, the rest of the country seems to be in a softened period, and when the rest of the country is doing well, Alberta's a little soft, and that's basically what we've seen for probably the last 7 years. It isn't until just last year. We saw a blip in the spring of 2022 right across the country of people buying properties to secure low interest rates. But once they really kind of peaked out, and especially in July of 2022 when we saw that largest one-time increase of 1%, it was like a light got switched off, and everybody really went like, how high is this going to go? And you started hearing people like, are we going to hit 14%, 16, 18%, like crazy numbers like that. So we definitely saw a softening, but then what happened, and again, here's that seesaw, is that we had just a steady, solid market in Edmonton last year, but Calgary boomed. Calgary was crazy. And the reason for that is because people started looking around, and as I've said a lot of times, if people couldn't afford a $1.2 million home in Vancouver at 2%, they certainly couldn't afford a 1.2% or $1.2 million home at 6%, but they want quality of life. So they look around and they go, well, Alberta's doing well. You know, oil is doing well, and there's lots of jobs and stuff like that. And I can go and buy a beautiful $600,000 home in Calgary and actually have a little bit of money in the bank. So they all started coming here. And so, especially once interest rates started to level out, we have started to see more people coming. So the interest rates have definitely affected most of Canada, and anybody in Alberta that's lived here already have certainly seen that impact. But we're seeing people that have potentially been in a position to buy an $8-9 million, $1 million home in Ontario and BC, coming here and being able to afford a $600,000 or $700,000 home in Calgary. And now what's happening is those prices have gone up. Calgary's single-family home average is over $700,000, whereas in Edmonton we're sitting around $475,000. So people are understanding that, and that's why we think that they're finding their way up. So it's definitely had impacts in a lot of areas negatively, but also I would say it's kind of in a way, for the increase of population, it's had a positive impact for Alberta.
So Edmonton's kind of on sale when you look at just on the price difference between Edmonton and Calgary. I mean, you come 3 hours up the road and you're almost half price.
Yeah.
I mean, different feel. You're further from the mountains here in Edmonton, whereas Calgary, you're hour and a half away, things like that, different lifestyles. But
yes.
If you're new to the country, is it a huge difference? And I guess that's what a lot of people are going to ask themselves.
Well, so we're a unique province in the fact that take Ontario out of it, and I would say Quebec as well. We're the only province that has two major cities. Like BC really only has Vancouver. I wouldn't necessarily put Victoria in a major city category. Saskatchewan has two small cities.
You might have a difference in opinion from somebody from Victoria.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the same thing. I'm exactly. Yeah. So you've only got Winnipeg and Manitoba. You've got kind of Halifax out in the Maritimes. We've got Edmonton and Calgary. We've got two major
like
cities.
1 million plus.
That's right. Absolutely.
Areas. Right?
That's right. So in response to your comment, we are the last major city to still be on sale, as you said. We're still the last major affordable city in Edmonton. How long that lasts, I'm certainly, as a real estate agent, predicting that this is going to be a strong year. We've heard some pretty...
This is not investment advice, by the way.
No, yes, not investment advice by any stretch. So we've had, and I'll say, based on that, I will say that I've certainly heard very, and you heard him too, some pretty seasoned, 28, 30-year investors in Edmonton that say that we're in for a potentially strong couple of years. But of course, there's so many variables, political, not just in Alberta, but federal, and then obviously the situations that's going on in the world. It's horrific to say this, but obviously there are people that are positively impacted due to wars around the world, and those that are, have a heavy reliance on oil or oil-producing nations certainly benefit because the price of oil goes up. And so that's unfortunate about what's happening in Ukraine and in the Middle East, but that's certainly having a positive impact on where oil is. And even from that standpoint, there's also, obviously we're all trying to become more green and environmentally friendly, and there's a push to reduce our footprint when it comes to that. But then you take a look around at kind of just the sensibilities of what it takes to live life today and next year and the year after that. And I certainly think that oil and gas still has a pretty prominent position in making
be a long runway.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Whether you feel that's good or not, it's just simply the reality.
What are some of the opportunities that you're seeing in Edmonton right now? Like as far as what a lot of your investor clients are looking at for properties, are they looking for a lot of flip opportunities? Are they looking at redevelopment opportunities? I mean, we just had some big zoning changes here in Edmonton at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
What are some of your investor clients?
Well, I think that just looking at it from a macro level, and again, this is when I do this 1 hour map tour where I'm on Zoom and I talk about the city with investors, trying to educate them. I start off by suggesting that Edmonton proper is just shy of 1 million people. That could change at any time now. Edmonton Greater, which includes all of these small communities, small cities and stuff like that, like St. Albert, Sherwood Park, Beaumont, Leduc, Fort Saskatchewan, that balloons us up to about 1.35 million. We're still a smaller community with that than Calgary. Calgary's at 1.45. The latest thing that I heard from some news reports is that if the amount of people moving to Calgary continues, they're going to be a 2 million city by 2030. So 6 years from now. That's just crazy. Edmonton has always been more progressive than Calgary when it comes to housing and various things like that. I think coming back to why Edmonton won't burn as bright as Calgary is we've always been we have more purpose-built rentals and stuff like that, so we can absorb a lot more new people in the rental community than they can in Calgary. But Edmonton is anticipating the population to double, I believe, in the next 40 or 50 years, and they want half of that, 500,000 people living on the current footprint. For 4 reasons, I like to say. Environmental, obviously we can't keep expanding out. Infrastructure costs, let's have more people using what's already here rather than building more schools, building more roads, stretching transit out farther. The third reason is we don't run into oceans and mountains and lakes like Ontario or Toronto and Vancouver do, but we run into all these small communities. We can't expand to the east because we run into Sherwood Park or the county of Strathcona. They make it pretty. They make it pretty clear they don't want to be part of Edmonton, right? All these communities, they want to be their own communities, so we can't really expand out. And then the last is the tax benefit from the city. If you tear down a $400,000 house and build a brand new house, it's going to be worth a lot more, and you can tax it more. But so for those 4 reasons, the city is really focused on densification. And so there's lots of opportunities for investors from a standpoint of just taking derelict buildings and renovating them so that it's a good quality place for someone to live, adding units into houses. Obviously, probably the best example of that is single home, turning it into a suited property, or a side-by-side duplex that you can suite out the 2 basement suites and turn a two-unit property into a 4-unit property. Or the last one is infill, which is again, maybe tearing down that $400,000 house and building a side-by-side duplex with suites. So you're turning 1 unit into 4. Or what's also happening is people are taking large lots, tearing those down and turning them into 8 plexes. So that really seems to be the direction that also the city wants. I've gone into 110-year-old houses and they're still standing, but even from a standpoint of just unless you love those old cozy character homes, they don't have closets. They've got 1 bathroom. And everything's small. It's small and stuff like that. And then I've had a few inspectors go into these places and they just kind of like, oh, where do I start with what's wrong with this house? And
a report like this.
Yeah, exactly. And good on those people that love them. That I have had clients that love squeaky floors and just love the little nooks and why did they do that? I don't know. Well, anyways, I love it. Let's buy this house.
Well, and on the densification part, I think a lot of people don't realize that here in Edmonton, I think it's been years ago that the city has eliminated parking restrictions. So that creates some interesting opportunities and maybe some problems in some neighborhoods, but at the moment it hasn't been a problem.
Yeah, so I 2 stories on that. So one, I remember asking, we had somebody come into our office to explain the zoning, and the question of parking came up and said, how is the city handling that? And they said they're putting it on the developers
Right.
to make that decision as to whether or not they feel that parking should be there, whether it's just stalls in the back of the property or garages and stuff like that. But the most interesting story that I've heard is that there's a prominent developer or investor in town who has recently been green-lit to build, I believe, like a 40-unit building with zero parking, no parking.
Oh, wow.
And they're doing that because they're being incentivized by the city to not put parking, to encourage people to live there and live, this 15-minute or 20-minute city where it's about a block away from an LRT station. The idea being that people can, work and play and that without a vehicle. And so that was probably one of the most mind-blowing things I'd heard. This developer, again, they're getting on board with that. They're really changing the product that they're putting out on the market to be with what the city wants, which is less vehicles. And so that was a pretty extreme story that I heard.
Well, and it's, I know there's a lot of people pushing in that direction. I know I spoke to a city councilor a few months ago, and it was a similar thing. Like they said basically the city is putting it on developers because, at least for the foreseeable future, for the marketability of the product, you're still going to need a parking stop, some kind of parking allocation. And it's interesting to hear about this story here about this project, that many units with zero parking. And it is interesting though that they wouldn't have done it. I'm not familiar with the project, but it's interesting to know that the developer probably wouldn't have done it without incentivization from the city.
Absolutely,
So,
yeah. Because
changed the game up quite a bit.
Yeah, well, because coming back to this presentation that we were made in regards to the zoning changes, what the developers need to think about when they're developing is what's the end purpose of this? Are we going to try to sell this building, or are we going to use it as a rental? And who is going to be coming to use that? Will we be able to find renters if it's in an area where everybody needs a car?
Yeah.
And if everybody needs a car in that area and you don't have parking, you're not going to find tenants.
Right.
And then from a standpoint of resale, 5-10 years down the road, will this property be able to sell if everybody coming into this goes, well, this was a failed experiment with no parking. Clearly, everybody still needs parking. I'm not buying that, and they'll not be able to get the price they want, however many years down the road. So that's the big gamble that a lot of developers have. The city really doesn't care. They've got their mandate of trying to be a greener city. And but they're not necessarily going to go back to that developer 10 years from now or that owner 10 years from now and say, oh yeah, sorry about that. Here's some subsidies to compensate you for the fact that your property's worth less 10 years down the road because we wanted you to not put parking in.
Well, there's always more money where that came from.
Yeah.
We won't get into the taxation.
Right.
The
Yes.
taxation thing,
That's
but,
right.
that's
true.
That's another a whole other issue.
Yeah,
We
that's
probably
right.
go for. I don't think we have the battery power in the phone to record that conversation. So interesting on that. When it comes to things like, are you seeing some of your investor clients do things like garage suites, and like you talked about redeveloping, adding a suite into an existing building or building an eightplex? What other kind of crazy configurations are some of your clients coming up with?
Well, specifically with grad suites, which they call them backyard houses now. That's the new terminology, is that the city is really gung-ho on them, and certainly you see that development happening a lot, but I don't necessarily think as big or as much as the investment community or the city expected. A big reason for that is that at least based on my last research, and so as of this recording, this might change, but just from a standpoint of that, the cost of building a backyard house, so garage with a suite on top, you're looking at north of $250,000 to make something that's going to be quality. Usually it's just a one-bedroom suite. You can usually generate around $1,600. So, you can't get a mortgage. It's going to take you a long time to recoup those funds, based on charging $1,600. And again, my last understanding is that you're not seeing a $250,000 lift. You might see a 50 or 60% lift off that investment. So you're spending $250,000, but you're not getting a $250,000 lift on the value of your property. So what we're seeing most backyard houses being built for right now is personal use. The kind of the whole, and this is a whole other topic of aging in place. Again, I used to be in this seniors housing several years ago, and it's what direction is the baby boomers going to be going in? Is it that they're more and more are going to be going into the seniors housing, or are they going to want to stay in their own homes? And are we going to have this even larger at-home care community? And so I know with a couple of different circumstances, they were this one in Crestwood, so they certainly had some money. They built a massive one-bedroom suite on top of a triple-car garage. It had an elevator in it, and they built that for the parents to live in. And so the family with the grandkids was living in the house, and this brand-new garage was going to be there so that grandma and grandpa had their own place to live. The elevator was there for when they couldn't do stairs anymore, and they would all live together and obviously be able to kind of live on the same plot of land. So I think I've heard more of that type of stuff going on and less of garage suites being built specifically for rentals. Where I actually do think that's been more successful from a standpoint is working with builders and getting builders to build grad suites. A great example of that stuff happening would be to go to the Blatchford area. If you drive into Blatchford, there's lots of backyard suites.
Greenspaw would be another one of those too.
Yeah, okay, yeah. But Blatchford, in terms of, there's supposed to be 10,000 houses there. There's, I don't know, a couple hundred right now, and there's a lot. And so I think that if you can work with a builder and get them to, I suppose in a perfect world, put yourself in a situation where you've got a house with a basement suite and then a garage suite, you've got a triplex, but again, coming out to what you can do on a corner lot, you can put as many units as you want on a corner lot. So in lots of situations, people are building a fourplex with 4 basement suites and then a garage suite, or possibly even 2 garage suites, so you might have a 10 unit lot. But again, you've only got.
All depends on the zoning and
this is the new zoning that's allowed. But you would have a 4-car garage, so you'd have 10 different units, 4 garages. So you obviously have a lot of street parking or people that don't have vehicles.
Okay, and then on the corner lot, you've got more opportunity for some parking, at least on the street.
That's right.
And another thing I've heard too is that the city takes into consideration is if it's across the street from a park or a different kind of a zone and things like that. So it's going to be important for people to really consult with somebody to see what it is that they can put onto a property exactly. But no, lots of opportunities there. Another thing, you mentioned baby boomers, and that reminds me of a lot of conversations that's been happening over the years as far as demographics. Demographics is a huge player in real estate cycles. You've got the millennials that are now approaching their 40s. And are you starting to see a lot of millennials enter the buying market, or have you been seeing that for some time now?
Well, I think we've been seeing it for some time. I wouldn't necessarily. I help lots of people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s that are purchasing houses. I wouldn't necessarily, from my personal experience, see any sort of specific situation one way or the other. People come from all sorts of different backgrounds. I've helped people in their 50s buy $120,000 condos. I've helped people in their late 20s buy $600,000 homes, and it just, a lot of it has to do with, where they are financially and the career choices that they've made in that. So couldn't really comment specifically on that. I will say this, that we've got Mogul Mastermind next week, the last Wednesday of February. So I do all my preparation tomorrow And there's an article that I saw, I haven't read it yet, but it does say that there are now more millennials on the planet than there are baby boomers.
Oh.
So, which I obviously would assume that because the baby boomers are unfortunately starting to
They're in the sunset.
yeah, as you say, die off. But I mean, let's call a spade here. So, anyways, that what sort of impact does that have? So, but coming back to like again, when I was in the seniors housing, and that is 5 years ago, we were. It was interesting at that time, and so this is again going back to 2017, 2018, and the baby boomers had just started. The oldest baby boomers at that time had hit 75, and so that's the idea being that that's when you're going to see a bit of a slowdown in terms of their mental and physical abilities, and maybe start to need some sort of assisted living. And so now, obviously, that would we're 5-6 years later, we're well into it. But so there's this massive amount of seniors that are moving into the twilight of their years. And so I'm a big Jimmy Buffett fan, and that's why I always thought it was pretty interesting the late Jimmy Buffett, yes, unfortunately, and he owns seniors housing down in like Florida and stuff like that, where people can go and literally live the Jimmy Buffett lifestyle.
That makes sense.
All day, every day. Right, and so that's so as you're looking for from that standpoint, what are people looking in terms of trying to add? Because again, the baby boomers I think were the first that were really wanting life experiences, right, where they'd afforded enough finances to be able to say, I want experiences, travel, events, and now I think that they're at that standpoint. That's right, and so what is that seniors community offering to that age group that says, look, I've lived my life this way, why would I suddenly start to compromise? And so I think that's the Jimmy Buffett, I think it's called Latitude, is the best example that I've come across that says, here's a way that you can enjoy that lifestyle that you've always wanted, sun, surf, sand, and so who else is going to be doing, I mean, I've heard where there's seniors that have found that it's cheaper to live on a cruise ship. So they live on a cruise ship.
Oh.
That's all they do. They live on a cruise ship. They live on a cruise ship.
Sold off everything?
Sold off everything, and because they're looking, a seniors complex, you're looking at like $4,000 a month, meals included. Well, you might be able to live for less than that on a cruise ship. You travel the world and go from there. I've heard other people that basically have moved into, and some discount hotels that have dedicated one whole floor to seniors, because they've all got, seniors, they usually drop down to maybe 2 meals a day and they don't eat much. And these discount hotels are, they offer free breakfast, continental breakfast and stuff like that. So, you've got a workout room, you've got a swimming pool, you've got, a continental breakfast. What else do you really need? You go into the seniors housing room and there's like a TV and a bed and a bathroom, right? Well, that's a hotel room. So yeah, it's interesting to see. I mean, we got off topic here from that standpoint, but just it's unless you are either a senior or in the seniors industry, you have no idea what a big, massive, multi-billion-dollar industry it is. Because if you're not in the industry or you're not a senior, you really don't want to turn your attention to that, because it's like, well, who wants to think about what they're going to be in 30 years or 40 years? So, but those that are in the industry, and it's interesting to see where it's going.
Very interesting. The other question I had in my mind is that for people, just going back to investors, and especially people that want to get started. We talked about financing, finding out what they can do, get pre-approved, figure out what they can afford. What are some other things that come to mind when somebody's looking to make that step and buy that first investment property?
Yeah, I think that just because I've seen this happen so many times, and it seems simple, but I think it is really important, and that's to know your why. Like, why do you really want to do this, right? Because as you know, being a long-time investor, and I know there can be some dark days. There could be some frustrating times. Yeah, exactly.
No.
Yeah, exactly. People thinking that it's like it's passive income, but
You just buy a property, flip it, and you make $20,000.
That's
next
right.
month.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So well, and that's active income. But just as a buy and hold, as passive income, it might be passive income, but it's far from a passive activity, right? You're either managing the property and the tenants yourself, or you're managing the manager and the contractors that are managing the property. So I think it's important to be very clear on that, and certainly from my time over the last 3 to 4 years of starting a new career as a real estate agent, understanding my why in regards to, doing all that I was doing. As people would always ask me, are you busy? Well, my answer is always, I'm always busy. It's whether or not you're making deals, and that's really what it matters. Because being busy doesn't pay the bills. Doing deals pays the bills. So it's important to have that end game in mind in anything you do, but certainly from this standpoint of truly understanding the why, because the why is going to get you through once you start doing that. So when you're super clear on that, I think that helps, and that's going to be your guiding compass to get you back on track when you start to venture off. And the second thing as well that I think those that are like super focused on, like, I want to do flips, or I want to do wholesaling, or I want to do creative strategies, they're the blessed ones, because I think that more times than not, there's so many ways to make money in real estate. I think it can sometimes be overwhelming, and it can be confusing for people. And I mean, I've chatted with somebody, I worked with a couple people where they were in various different training courses and various things like that, and ultimately, I talked to them 1 month, and we're going to do buy and holds. Talked to them 6 weeks later, just did this amazing flipping course. I think we want to do flipping. We think we're going to get into multifamily, and we're going to and then Airbnb. And so my message back to them was, you need to pick one, and kind of go with your gut. Russell Westcott, great educator. He told me a story years ago, back when he was still with Rain, because he owned all those townhomes in the Northeast, and why did you choose to do that? And he told me that the first property he bought was an up-down duplex, and it was a total disaster. It was this unbelievable headache. And so I was working through that. He bought a townhome, and it was a great experience. So he bought another townhome, and it was a great experience. So he got rid of the up-down house and said, of course, in real estate, if you have success, just duplicate. So he said, well, this was a good experience. I'm going to go do this multiple times. And that's what he stuck with. I think so that's another thing as well. And then the last thing I would say is keep it simple. I think that if you're a newer investor, and taking something from Keyspire, the 4 ways to win. So there's, mortgage pay down, there's market appreciation, there is cash flow, and then there's forced appreciation, which is renovating the property. So
Lift the value.
That's right. Yeah. So that's easy to say, but more difficult to do, especially if you've never done it before. And so I do. If you're up for that, great, go for it. But I think a lot of times I talk with people that want to do that, but they don't know any contractors, they don't know the price of anything, they don't know any of that stuff. Whereas if they go and they pay fair market value for what would be deemed as a decent, I won't say turnkey renovated, but a decent quality, nice, clean property that would rent out relatively easy, and just focus on the buy and hold, that's one less step and a lot easier than trying to, purchase a property and renovate it, right? Again, the fun, exciting, cool thing is buying that property, but 6 months later, when that adrenaline rush is gone, what you're left with is the real hard, heavy lifting, which is making sure you find good tenants and making sure you, develop systems so you don't have the heartaches of the three.
Thank you.
They don't have the heartaches of the 3 a.m. phone call or anything like that, because that's the part that, and again, you being an investor for probably almost 2 decades and me being an investor for 16, 17 years, the thing that always stays is the tenant. So you need to be really dialed in on making sure that you know exactly the type of landlord you want to be, the type of property manager you want working for you, and the type of tenant that you want to attract.
Well, and even on that, that brings up an interesting lesson that I was told a long time ago is even the attitude of yourself as a landlord and the tenant as the tenant. It's once you start to change your mindset to looking at your tenant as a business partner, you start to look at things a lot differently. Like a lot of people get into the game and they want to be a landlord, right? But then they start looking down on their tenants, and that's the wrong way to really approach it. You have to approach it as a business partnership, essentially, because you're getting into hopefully a long-term arrangement that's going to be productive for both people. I mean, they're going to be your customer. They're going to be taking care of your asset for years, hopefully, and they're going to get a good place to live in the meantime, and you're going to get some of the value from your investment. So that's another important thing. Another thing too is how investors value their time, because it's very tempting to get into the game where and I've made this mistake myself, where you're going to be managing the property yourself. So you think that, oh, okay, well, I can afford to get into this property a little skinny. Yeah, the cash flow is not that great, but I'm going to be managing it myself. You've been in that situation before too. You've managed properties yourself. What's the flaw in that thinking?
Right off, to answer your question, the flaw is the ability to scale up. Unless you absolutely start to say, hey, I really like managing. And then second of all, have a system-based approach where anytime you run into a problem, you're going to fix the problem in a way that you can develop a system so that problem, A, hopefully doesn't happen again, or B, it's solved by a system where you don't have to be directly involved. I think it's really important personally, and not everybody agrees with this, and that's fine, but I think it's important personally to manage properties at the beginning, because you're going to learn a lot of lessons. That's right, and then you can talk intelligently with that property manager so that you get where they're coming from, and second of all, you can find a property manager that's in sync with the type of tenant you want and the type of just how you want that to be managed, for sure. But I think that, that's even why, like, make sure you pay yourself. If you're going to self-manage, make sure you pay yourself so that you can feel good about that. Well, at least I'm getting paid for what I do. Even if I suppose you could pump that back into the property if you want to, but there's lots to be said for just, knowing that you can take your partner or your spouse or your family out for a nice dinner to say, you know what, this, thank you, this is being paid for by my tenant, kind of a thing. But yeah, if you really set yourself up by being burnt out, you can't scale, because if you're sitting there going, I'm overwhelmed by one property, how am I going to manage 10? But then the other thing as well is that this is exactly the time that you've got to pull out that why and take a look and say, oh yeah, that's right, okay, here's why I'm doing this, and map out a plan for here's how I'm going to get out of this situation. Stabilize the property, get yourself in a position, as you said, maybe the cash flow is so skinny you can't even afford a property manager. Try to see if you can get yourself in a position where you can start to pay a property manager, and then, or at least develop systems. I mean, one of the things that my wife Tracy and I but learned over experience was there's only a couple of emergencies. There's only a couple of reasons why a tenant should be phoning you after hours or in the middle of the night. The heat doesn't work, there's a fire, or there's a flood, right?
Or the fridge quit.
Well, see, the fridge isn't an emergency.
No,
the fridge is an emergency. Yeah, but they might. But so
they would call.
That's right. And so yeah, so
I made that call as a tenant.
So if there's a fire, phone the fire department. Phone 911.
Yes.
If it's furnace or heat or water, here's the furnace company we work with, Mr. Tenant.
Yeah.
Here's the plumber we work with, Mr. Tenant. They accept after-hour phone calls. If you phone me at 3 in the morning, I'm phoning them. So let's speed up the process. Just phone them directly, and then get that resolved, and I'll circle back around again, obviously, after the fact, and follow up. Everything else should be something, the fridge, and of course, hey, why not? Of course, you're going to do that, but that's where, whether or not it's an answering service, or you're only able to reach out by email, one of the worst things that you could do as a self-manager is let the tenant know that you're the owner, Just you are the property manager.
manager,
So
yeah.
and then second of all, when they know you're the owner, also have them have direct access to you, because especially as you start to scale up, that can become a full-time job. Now, if you want to become a property manager, like I know some investors have, great, but how they've been able to manage their own portfolio of 40 or 50 properties and take on another few hundred was they developed systems in place. And one of those is, not taking phone calls on a whim. The tenants know specifically about the process of if there's anything outside those three emergencies, this is the process that they follow.
And that's an important point when it comes to scaling, because at some point, even if you do take on the role of your own property manager and you pay yourself for it, the novelty is going to wear off at some point, or you're just going to want to retire and you're going to want to hand that off to somebody.
Yeah.
If you're paying yourself and you already have that expense built in of property management, it makes it a lot easier to hire a property manager than replace yourself, and then you can move on and do other things in life. If you're managing yourself, and I've found this lesson too the hard way, when you're managing it yourself, you basically have a second job, especially if you're working already and your real estate's a side gig, but you're working as the property manager, so you're taking the calls every now and then. And if you're not paying yourself for that service, well, it's just a second job that you're not getting paid for, and it may take years to get paid for it when you sell the property, hopefully. But if property values don't go the right way, well, you may never get paid for that time. So it's really important to budget that time.
Yeah, so on that note, we all only have so much time in the day, and so every time that you're managing that property, that's another investment property that you could have been looking at. That's another offer you could have been writing. That's all of those types of things. How are you able to scale up if you're spending all that time property managing? And again, if you really, really love property management, then maybe get a property manager license. And again, I know people that have done this. Get a property manager license. You can become very, very financially set by taking on managing other people's properties. If that's something you want to do. That's right. So that's the thing as well. You can't do it all. We've all got strengths and weaknesses, and again, most people don't want to be a property manager. So if it's not a strength of yours, then you should find someone else so that you can focus on the things you want to do. It is an investment, and yes, there's lots of people that invest their money through stocks and bonds and stuff like that on their own, and there's a lot of self-investment vehicles and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of, if you're on Wealth Simple or something like that, and you're managing your own money and stuff like that, there's a lot of algorithms and a lot of active support there.
But you're also investing your time.
That's right. Again,
so you've got to factor that in.
Yeah, exactly. So again, coming back to as a loose comparison between, if you're managing your asset and stuff like that, sometimes there's people that have been licensed to do this. They've been trained. It's all they do.
Yeah.
So invariably they're going to be, should be better. Obviously there's challenges with great property managers, good property managers, and average property managers out there.
There are some really good ones out there.
There are some really good ones out there. And I've also had people that, I've talked to one investor who had a horrible relationship with a property management company. Somebody else has a great relationship with that same property management company. And that's again why, with anything else, you're not going to click with everybody else. But it's important to know what, again, your direction is and what you want to do, and understand where you want to get there, and understand you can't do it alone. And so you have to start finding support of people that are going to, help you get to where you want to go.
Okay. Well, Devin, I know you're a busy guy. You've got some deals to get to. You've got an open house to get to and all that. So this has been a great conversation.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Devin Gray. And how do people get in contact with you, Devin?
You can reach me on my cell phone at 780-951-9279, or on my email, Devin, DEVIN, at mogulrg, which is mogulrg.com. Devin at mogulrg.com. I'm with eXp Realty and the Mogul Realty Group.
Okay. All right, sounds good. All right, Devin, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody for watching. You all take care. Best of luck to you, and bye for now.